everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor. This video is a little bit different to what I normally do. I'm going to be talking about a non-fiction book related to my actual day job for once. This book probably hasn't been talked about on Book Talk before. It's probably been talked about on like animal behaviour, education style content. So I thought we could just have a bit of a chat about it and I could maybe convince you to read this book, an audience that might not ever come across this book otherwise. This book is all about the art and science of training animals. It's quite an old book. It came out in 1991, I believe, and it's written by Karen Pryor, who sadly passed away earlier this year. Karen Pryor is an icon in the animal behaviour field. She was a behavioural biologist and she did a lot of work training dolphins. Dolphins are pretty much trained exclusively with positive reinforcement and with a marker signal like a clicker, usually a whistle. And Karen Pryor has done a lot to bring that style of training into dog training, horse training, and basically across the board companion animal training. This is a science-based way of training that's ethical and isn't focused on like incorrect dominance alpha male models. It's not focused on like dominating and becoming the leader in any sense. Although she does talk about those methods as well and why they work and why other methods are more ethical. And this book is a really great manual that takes you through all of these key elements of training. I myself use these methods. I'm a certified equine behaviour consultant with the IAABC, which is the International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants. There's so many acronyms in the animal behaviour world, so don't worry about it if that just like goes over your head, because it goes over most of our heads, honestly. I mean, we have the ABTC, we've got the FABC, we've got the APBC, we've got the IAABC. We have got so many, and there's so many ABCs in there because there's always animal and behaviour and consultant in there. Sometimes there's clinical animal behaviour consultants as well. So yeah, it becomes a whole big soupy mess. Before all of these acronyms put you off, don't click off the video because I'm going to tell you like why this is actually important and why you could benefit from reading a book like this. You might think, yeah, I don't work with animals, I don't train animals, but I think a great number of you will have pets. You will have cats and dogs and hamsters and fish. You might be like, yeah, goldfish though, like they can't really do anything. That's not true, and she actually talks about fish in this book a little bit. She talks about how she trains a fish with clicker training to do a little trick. And this definitely works because my boss actually did the same thing. He used the ripple on the surface of the water instead of a clicker because the fish can't hear the clicker, and he trained one of the fish to swim through a hoop. So it works. All animals are intelligent and all animals can be trained if you follow the principles of the science of behaviour. Now the cool thing is this doesn't just work on animals. It actually works on people as well, and your children and your husband and basically everyone. In this book, Karen is really good to not just give you examples from like dog training or dolphin training. She talks about zoo animals, she talks about cats, she talks about horses. The equestrian world is kind of its own beast. They're not very into like positive reinforcement. It's quite a negative reinforcement and punishment based kind of culture. Although it is moving in the right direction, and you know, people like me are working hard to move it in that direction. But yeah, she makes good references to horses, and she also makes reference to people, to your colleagues, to your husband, to your children, and how applying these techniques works, what it would actually look like, and you know, what the effects of that are. Although she is quite careful to say, like, you know, you shouldn't be too open about the fact that you're doing this. It might be seen as a bit manipulative. People don't really like the idea that you are rewarding them for certain things and withholding reinforcement for other things to like control their behaviour. It sort of backfires if they know, but nonetheless it is very effective. Here's an example from a human interaction you might be familiar with. I think this is even an example she uses in the book. Say mother-in-law or mother is calling up, and every time she calls you or you call her, she's just moaning for like 10-15 minutes about how you never call her and how blah blah blah, I know I'm not feeling well and blah blah blah, being very negative. Basically she's kind of almost punishing the fact that you've called her, and so you don't want to call her because like you're just going to be berated for not calling enough every time you do. She in this example is like punishing your behaviour, which isn't good because like the behaviour she wants, which is you to call her, is like what she would rather reinforce. So this is an example of, you know, the mother-in-law not applying behaviour theory very well. She is punishing the behaviour that she wants instead of reinforcing it. Now, what might happen in this situation is that you or her like son doesn't want to call her because like it's just an ordeal all the time. So what you can do in this situation is call up, and when they're having this moan and this bitch, just don't respond to it. You don't have to argue back or be punishing back. You can just sit there silently and not be like, yeah, you know, basically not validate it too much. Just be calm and basically don't reinforce it, give minimal back. When she finally runs out of steam and goes, oh, well, fine then, how are you then, how are you? You can then, you know, reward that positive response with, you know, yeah, I've been really good and I've been doing this, but how have you been? Tell me more about this. So you reward her positive step in the conversation by being really pleasant, by being really engaged, and by asking a question back and giving her another opportunity to talk. She might go off again and be really negative, and you just wait, just kind of ignore it and don't validate it too much, unless it's like a very obvious concern that you want to validate, obviously. But if he's just being a bit toxic and a bit punishing and passive aggressive to you, just ignore it, wait till she calms down, and then asks a nice question back, and then again you would respond and be, you know, really engaged, really warm, really nice, ask a question back and kind of reward her in the conversation. If you do this within a couple of calls, that like passive aggressive mother-in-law will extinct that behaviour. She'll stop calling to moan, she'll call up, she'll be pleasant, she'll ask you questions, you can ask questions back, and you can have a nice positive interaction, and it will actually make your relationship much better. But if you avoid calling, if you enable the behaviour, if you argue back, if you feed into the toxicity, it will just be circular, it will just go round and round. So you can actually train this person in your life to behave in the way that you want to behave. However, if you sit her down and say, hey mum, I'm not going to talk to you in this way, I'm going to only talk to you if you're going to be nice, that will not work and it will not go well. It will sort of backfire. So seems manipulative, but it works really well. And the thing is, like, you can know this information or not, these dynamics of reinforcement and punishing to stop behaviours and reinforce other behaviours are at play regardless of whether you know about them and apply them or not. So if you're having issues with your children or a spouse or your pet, researching and learning a bit more about behaviour theory and how it's applied in interactions and how it's used in animal training can really like make your relationships a lot more positive, stop you making some mistakes that you might be making, like punishing behaviours that you want, like calling, and reinforcing behaviours that you don't want. It can actually foster harmonious interactions. Now, maybe that's gone over your head a bit because you don't know what I mean by learning theory and the science of behaviour, so I'll give you a quick little rundown of it. And there's a lot to this, there's too much to break down here, but I'll talk about one concept: operant conditioning. This is basically the concept of reward and punishment. There are 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. There's 2 punishment and 2 reinforcement, and there's positive and there's negative, which isn't about positivity and negativity, it's about addition or the subtraction of something. So positive reinforcement is when you give something, you add something that is going to make that behaviour be repeated. So you reinforce the behaviour, you make it stronger. And this thing that you give is going to be a reward. It might be a food reward, it might be a scratch. If it's a person, it might be, you know, a laugh or a positive kind of interaction. It's defined by the learner, so it's anything that that learner wants and will work for to repeat that behaviour. Negative reinforcement, this is often confused with punishment, but negative reinforcement is when you take something away in order to make a behaviour stronger. And the thing that you're taking away is probably something aversive. So for example, if you're leading a dog or a horse and you apply pressure on the lead or the lead rope, then your horse or your dog walks forward, you release the pressure as they walk forward. So it's that removal of the pressure that increases the behaviour of walking forwards. A human example of this might be my car sat nav, which if you go over the speed limit, just makes this really loud dinging siren noise that is very aversive, and it doesn't go away until you've stopped speeding and you've hit the speed limit again. So it's kind of punishing, I suppose, the act of speeding, but it's also a negative reinforcer that I'm trying to work to relieve myself of by bringing my speed in line. Then we have positive and negative punishment. Negative punishment is when you take something away, probably something good, in order to stop a behaviour. So this is when, your child is screaming and so you take away their toy. Or it might be your horse is kicking the stable door, wanting its feed, and so you withhold the feed until they stop kicking the door, and then you give the feed at the time when they're still, because you want to punish the element of kicking the door and extinguish that behaviour and reward not kicking the door. Positive punishment is the addition of something aversive. So it's basically hitting your horse if they do something wrong, hitting anybody. It could be like, for example, if someone does something a bit cringe and you laugh at them, that could be a punisher. So, the punisher is defined by the learner as well. A laugh can be reinforcing and it can also be punishing. It depends on the context. So, it becomes quite complex, and like I said, they kind of work in diagonals. So something that's a negative reinforcer could also be a positive punisher if you go over the line from uncomfortable to actually aversive. Same thing happens if you're trying to work in the element of positive reinforcement. Every time you're actually withholding that reward could be seen as a negative punisher of what they were doing at that time. The timing of giving these rewards or this punishment, or of removing the thing, removing the pressure, or removing the something that they like, that is what will be punished or reinforced at the time. Punishment for animals especially, it does not work after the fact. You can't, have your horse make a mistake riding and then go back to the stable and punish them for it. That's considered abusive. People do it, but it is abusive, and mainly because the horse doesn't understand what it's being punished for. It's going to be punished for something completely unrelated, so it's not effective and it's just going to damage the relationship. Now that I've explained a little bit more about those concepts and what they are, hopefully you can see now how that applies to all of your interactions with people and animals, people that take in information and then use that information to inform their future behaviour, which is every living being. This book goes into a little bit more depth about all those concepts, but it remains very simple and easy to understand. So if you need a little bit more, then read this book, if you were interested in anything I just said. But besides that, this book also talks about shaping. This is where you break down the final behaviour, like dolphin jumping through a hoop, into lots of small little behaviours, and you reward each little step until your animal can do it or is relaxed at doing it. If you're doing having an injection, you want them to be relaxed when you touch their neck, and when you reach a hand towards them, and then when you reach the syringe towards them, and then maybe you use a cocktail stick in lieu of a needle and they're relaxed for that. And then you introduce the vet, who's doing a nice friendly pretend injection, and then you have the vet do the real injection. That's a very fast forward explanation, but you would do it in a lot more steps than that, especially if they had a lot of fear. But yes, you essentially break down things into little building blocks and you build it up slowly. And this is especially important for animals, potentially children, anything that won't understand verbally, like that you can't just explain, hey, I want you to jump through this hoop. With animals, you need to have a different way of communicating with them, and using the rewards and shaping behaviour is how you do that. You can get really precise about saying yep, that's what I want you to do, by using a marker signal like a clicker. Most people know what clickers are and what clicker training is. The clicker is used to just basically say, yep, that's it, and it tells the animal that a reward is coming. But a dolphin that's jumping through a hoop 20 meters away can't have a reward as it jumps through the hoop, because that's just not practical. So use a clicker to say, yep, reward is coming, then they can come over and receive their reward. This book has a chapter on clicker training at the end that was kind of added several years after the initial publication of this book, because it started to pick up in popularity and started to be used a lot more. This book also talks about stimulus control and cues. This is basically where if you say sit, your dog sits 100% of the time, and if you don't say sit, then the dog doesn't sit. That's what stimulus control is. It means the behaviour is reliably performed when the cue is given, and it's not performed at other times. A lot of people don't have very good stimulus control. Sometimes the cue also isn't what you think it is. You might think telling your horse to back up is the cue that the horse takes to back up. But if you're consistently doing a hand motion at the same time, or a certain body position, you might find that your horse backs up just from doing the action and not from the word. It might be that you have several cues for the same behaviour, so it might be saying back up and doing the hand signal. But if you find your horse doesn't back up purely from the vocal signal, and only if you add in this as well, then this is actually your cue, not the verbal cue of back up. This is how things in animal training can get a bit messy. I think it's something that I'm quite messy with as well. I train a lot of like husbandry procedures, like teaching donkeys to like have an injection or pick up their leg. I'm not doing a lot of like, you know, tricks or getting really clear with the cues just because of the nature of my work and training people that don't know how to use cues to handle that donkey essentially. So it's not something I'm as well practiced in, which is why I really appreciated this book for just, you know, teaching me a bit more about it myself that I can then apply with my own horse, with my own animals, start to master that skill, because it's an important skill to have, especially as a professional. You need to know these things. But I think it's also super important to know just as a lay person. If you have a dog, you need to know what your cues are. You need to have safe cues for recall out in public, otherwise you get into a dangerous situation. There's a really cute video that I've seen on TikTok or Instagram, and it's a girl's dog who sits, not just from the word sit, but if you say anything like, you know, broccoli in this tone of voice, he will reliably sit, because that vocal inclination, that kind of pitching, is the cue. It's not the actual word sit. And so you can say like salmon skin roll and he will do a little sit, and it's very cute. But that's an example of the cue not being what you think it is. And it's, you know, it's good to be aware of that, because then you can use the right cue and it means you can trust that you can keep your dog safe in a situation where, you know, you're saying sit because they're about to run into traffic. A lot of people do insufficient training for their pets, and you know, I appreciate that people don't want robotic animals, and I don't think this kind of training does make robots. It might do if you like use it too much, or if you don't phase out your clicker and don't phase out your food rewards. People don't want to be in a position where they're clicking and rewarding for everything, and you shouldn't. If you're doing it right, you would phase it out, and then it becomes just a happy thing that your animal knows how to do and is comfortable with. Training and applying behaviour theory, it's so important to having a positive relationship with your animals, for being safe, for taking the best care of them that you can. It's so important with your children and with human relationships, so that you can, you know, have harmonious relationships, have, you know, less conflict with people. And I think that once you know this, like once you kind of become woke to this information, it's really hard not to view lots of things through the lens of behaviour theory. And I think for the most part it's a good thing, so long as you know, also remember people's humanity and don't use it in a negative or manipulative way. There are people who manipulate people unwittingly using these principles. Fuckboys, narcissists, people that are, you know, trying to control their partner in a relationship use these principles pretty well, honestly. Narcissistic behaviours like ghosting, kind of intermittently responding, randomly giving big gifts and then being a really shitty person the rest of the time, randomly flooding, love bombing. These can all be explained through this lens of behaviour theory with terms like flooding, positive reinforcement, punishment. And, you know, I think by learning this stuff, you can very clearly see when someone is being abusive and manipulative as well. And I'm not saying that these narcissists are reading this book and then applying this. They're actually doing it, you know, it's second nature. This is in our psychology and in our biology. And they know this unwittingly and they apply it. We all do. We all know how to apply this, like, at that base level in our brains. But by bringing it into your conscious awareness, you can get better control of it. You can check any, like, negative, you know, manipulative tendencies that you might have, any passive aggression you might have, and modify your responses to other people in order to be more positive with them. And you can see when they're doing it to you and, you know, overcome that also in a positive kind of relationship building way. But there might be times when you don't want to do it in a relationship building way, when you would shoot the dog, as Karen Pryor says. There is a section in this book, it takes you through 8 different methods to use these behaviour theories, these behaviour principles, to stop certain behaviours. And there's basically like 4 methods that are pretty negative and 4 methods that are pretty positive, such as changing the motivation, rewarding for the right behaviour, etc. This book does clearly say that the 4 positive methods are more ethical than the negative methods, but it doesn't shy away from the reality that sometimes these things happen, sometimes these are the right decisions. I won't go too in depth on all these methods, you can read the book, but the first and the kind of like worst method or the most drastic method is shooting the dog, which, you know, gives us the title of this book. This basically says, like, if your dog has a behaviour problem, you can solve that problem by euthanizing them. And there might be times when the problem is really bad that is the most ethical choice. An example of shooting the dog that's not literally shooting the dog would be if you're in a relationship with a narcissist and they're being abusive, you could just shoot the dog. You could dump them. Don't shoot them. But you could dump them and that would be considered shooting the dog. You're just eliminating the source of the problem and that is solving the behaviour problem for you. In that circumstances, I would probably recommend that. That's probably the safest option. Get rid of the person. However, there's other options. In theory, by modulating your responses, you could change that person's behaviour. You could do couples therapy or something like that. But you would need to look at the situation and figure out what's best for you and, you know, make your decision based on that. I think this section was really useful. I like that she didn't shy away from the negative aspects, but I do think reading it could be a bit uncomfortable for some people. I think it's good to face up to the reality of the negative methods. Certainly lots of people use them. But there is one small bit where she describes a cat that she had that she got put down because it kept urinating on the oven, on the hob. That rubbed me up the wrong way a little bit because I thought, you know, surely there was maybe another solution. You could just clean the hob. But yeah, she is a very good trainer, so I trust that she tried other options. Maybe they discovered a medical issue with the cat, which meant that this was the best option. However, when she references it, it's quite cold. It sounds a little bit callous, so warning for that bit. That was a little bit off-putting, but for the most part, she's advocating for positive methods and like they are usually the best method, but not always. Another small trigger warning that was really my only criticism of this book. It was written in 1991, so it's a little bit dated, and this is evident in the fact that she talks about children with disabilities, and she refers to them as retarded. This isn't obviously meant to be derogatory, it's meant to be scientific, and it's just using the language of the 90s in a scientific, non-derogatory way. But the other angle of this is she was talking about zoo animals and moderating their behaviour, and then quickly transitions to talking about retarded children. I think that might rub some people up the wrong way. However, throughout the whole novel, she is constantly talking about the terms, giving an animal example, giving a people example, and she is putting them side by side, so it's not saying that people with special needs are basically animals, but it does come across a little bit like that. What she had to say in that section was super interesting. It's a bit like what I touched on a minute ago of if you can't communicate with someone, you need a way of saying, yep, that's the right thing to do, or no, that's not right, kind of like the hot and cold game. And she was talking about using these methods to work with people who were non-verbal, who had extreme learning difficulties, who, you know, they weren't actually sure what these people could see or hear or perceive because of their level of disability. And in the example, I might misremember it slightly, but they used colourful lights, this like cool light that had a nice light show, and the person that they were working with really enjoyed this, which was groundbreaking because they didn't previously know whether this person could see at all. They, you know, weren't very responsive, and so this allowed them to have a really good insight about that person and their level of perception. And they also really loved the lights, and so they could then use these lights to reward them for certain behaviours to help communicate like that this is what they wanted them to do. And yeah, it gave them a really good insight into the mental capability of this person, and the chapter was about how this kind of training also helps us see the mental capabilities of animals. You might think fish is really stupid, fish has 3-second memory, but then you do this training and you realise fish is actually intelligent, and you know, I did this training 2 weeks ago and the fish remembers it today, so fish actually have long-term memory. And you know, this allows us to see the true kind of scope of animals. I think everyone knows dolphins are really smart, dogs are really smart, and they're like, yeah, you do clicker training with dogs and dolphins, of course, but like, what do you mean you can do it with a fish? What do you mean you can do it with a horse? You get people making bold claims like, you can't clicker train a horse, you can't clicker train a pig, and you can, and they are very smart and they're very good at it. And this shows that just because, you know, they might not seem intelligent to you doesn't mean these animals aren't intelligent, doesn't mean they don't have emotions like you do. And it allows you to make some kind of assumptions and conclusions about the mental capabilities of other people and of animals. I think it allows you to see that they actually have greater potential than you maybe give them credit for, and that's an amazing thing. There's such a wonderful thing that happens when you're training an animal with positive reinforcement and clicker training and using lures and using cues. When they've had a lot of experience with like negative reinforcement and punishment, they can become quite shut down, they can become quite, you know, just doing what they're told. The moment you give them choice and say like, you choose, and then you can earn a reward, you can earn some food, you're getting paid for it, it's like they suddenly wake up, something suddenly clicks, and they're offering all of this behaviour. They get really into it, they get really excited that suddenly they're not getting bullied into stuff. They can actually have a say and make a choice. It's such a wonderful tool. People totally underestimate it. They think, you know, you can't do this, but you know, with wild animals in zoos, we pretty much exclusively use positive reinforcement, lures, cues, because we have this no contact rule with them. We don't touch them, we don't handle them. The way you would with a dog or a horse, you're going to handle them, put your hands on them, lead them around, put tack on them, ride them, pick up their feet. With wild species of animals in zoos, we don't do that, so instead we train them to lift up their foot and put it on a block and have their toes trimmed. I seen a video of a giraffe leaning, targeting into a needle so that it could have its vaccination, versus what you would do with a dog or a horse. You would have them stay still and then you would stick the needle in yourself, or the vet would. And it's amazing that something painful like that, getting stuck with a needle, you can train an animal to do voluntarily just with a little bit of food and a clicker. So this stuff is really fantastic. You can totally transform your relationship with your pets. You can totally, you know, transform their relationship with the vet and their treatments, make it positive, make it safe. And I think so many people would benefit from this kind of information. So if that sparks your joy, pick up this book, give it a read, give me a follow. I do have an Equine Behaviour YouTube channel and Instagram. I haven't posted on the YouTube channel in like 3 years. I don't know if I ever will. Don't feel like I've got time. And I also don't post that much on my like Instagram, apart from like cute pictures of my horse. But I might one day, if this video does well and you know you're liking the way I explain things, let me know. Maybe I'll reconsider, maybe I'll start doing some more stuff. And if you have any questions about animal behaviour at all, especially equine behaviour, ask me in the comments. I am a certified professional, still learning, wouldn't call myself an expert, but I am certified. I do work full time as it, so I'll do my best to answer you. If you have a behaviour problem with your horse, let me know, maybe I can help a little bit. And yeah, let me know if you like this kind of content and this departure from my normal bookish chats. Thank you so much for watching, and if you check out this book, let me know what you thought of it. Bye!